Is it question 1 to 7 together?
Take question
1 to 7.
Sorry, so many folders today. Questions 1 to 7, please. Can call our post take questions 1 to 7 together. The government established an interdepartmental group to consider the security of the election process and disinformation. The first report of the group was published on the 17th of July 2018 and looked at issues concerning the security of the electoral process, taking into account risks that apply across the whole spectrum. The report found that risks to the electoral system in Ireland are relatively low as a result of mitigation factors already in place. However, the spread of disinformation online and the risk of cyber attacks on the electoral system pose more substantial risks. The finding was in line with the EU level and recent international experience. The report identifies a number of proposals to deal with the gaps identified. It also acknowledges that actions arising from such proposals require widespread support from both political parties and civil society. The next steps, as agreed by government, are to expedite the establishment of the Electoral Commission and regulate the transparency of online political advertising. This will build upon some of the principles proposed in the Online Advertising and Social Media Transparency Bill by James Lawless, or rather Deputy James Lawless, in recent discussions in the Dáil and the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Communications, Climate Action and Environment. Regulation of online political advertising is to be considered in the first instance by way of a public consultation which was launched by the group on the 21st of September. Views can be submitted up to the 19th of October and the consultation will form the basis for an open policy forum thereafter. The forum will involve all relevant stakeholders across industry, academia, political parties, the media and civil society. It will seek to identify policy solutions that respect the right to freedom of expression and relevant EU law, while promoting the transparency necessary for open political discourse that will protect the electoral process from hidden influences and disinformation. The Open Policy Forum is planned to be held before the end of November 2018, after the presidential inauguration, as we believe it would not be appropriate to hold it during an election campaign.
Gramagat ceann comhairle agus gan buíochas leis an Taoiseach a sucht a chuid ragra. Taoiseach, can I firstly welcome the publication of the report. It certainly makes for interesting reading and points to a number of issues associated with the electoral process here in Ireland. We are familiar, I'm sure, with the problems associated with the electoral register, whether that's people dropping off the register or finding it difficult to register, or the register being very much out of date in some instances. I think it's accepted by every party the problems associated with the register need to be addressed, and the establishment of a permanent electoral commission would be a step in the right direction in addressing these issues. That has been a feature of programmes for government for at least a decade now, but it has yet to happen. Can I ask you, Taoiseach, at what stage preparations in respect of the Electoral Commission Bill are and when it might come before the Dáil? One particular area of note in the report concerns the possible extension of the franchise to citizens outside of the state. I asked you about this a fortnight ago, Taoiseach, in the context of the proposed referendum to extend presidential voting rights to citizens in the north and in the diaspora. This report notes that the Register of Electors in its current form cannot provide for a possible extension of the franchise to Irish citizens resident outside of the state. So that will clearly need to be addressed. What are your plans in that regard? In respect of the report's recommendations, Ceann Comhairle, tackling online disinformation, regulating online advertising, supporting the media and ensuring transparency of funding, I think these are all very welcome and should be implemented. There is commentary also in respect of donations. Taoiseach, there was an article in the Sunday Times at the weekend which highlights loopholes that exist in respect of disclosing political donations. I don't know if you saw that article. It made reference to a number of instances of money being paid to both your party and Fianna Fáil. for what the director of one of the corporate donors identified or called FaceTime. And I think it ought to be a source of concern. A particular group called Golden Horseshoe, who apparently made a donation to you, were mentioned. I don't know if you wish to comment on that on the record.
Deputy Joan Burton, please.
Thank you. First of all, Taoiseach, I think every party in this House would welcome to see the establishment of an electoral commission as soon as possible. The report does actually reference the online dangers that may well be there in relation to our electoral system. I also want to raise with you the electoral register, which was recently published and made available to public representatives. This year, the Dublin local authorities took the unilateral action of reordering the details of electors in the hard copy of the electoral register, the one which is provided and available to public representatives and indeed to candidates, including, particularly importantly, new candidates. The new design is basically unusable because the street numbers are randomised in terms of both odds and even numbers, so it would be impossible for a new candidate in particular to be able to identify where particular houses are and then go back and identify a name. And I questioned your minister in relation to this. I was told by way of PQ reply that the electronic soft copy provided to deputies in Excel would suffice and that the local authorities had discharged their duty to provide the register in usable format. Again, I don't know how many people use the electoral register, but certainly in the format it's in the moment as it's given, it's not usable, and that really is a significant constraint in a democracy to people who are candidates or public representatives who have legitimate access to the electoral register. I would like you to just tell us how you intend to proceed in relation to that.
Deputy Howlin.
Thank you, Cancor. I welcome the publication of the report in July, and although the report finds a low risk from cyber attacks or disinformation online in this jurisdiction, I think we certainly cannot be complacent, and I think we have to have measures in place when we're facing elections. Now, I understand maybe the reluctance to proceed very overtly in the course of a presidential election right now, but I would ask the Taoiseach if it is his intention to have the recommendations such as the regulation of online political advertising in place before the local and European elections next year. Is that the deadline? Because that would be tight enough if you're doing a consultation before the end of this year to have the draft heads done and the rules clearly delineated well in advance of a May election. And I think that it would be naive of us to think that there wouldn't be some elements who would like to interfere in an unauthorised way with our electoral processes. We're not so irrelevant that that would not take place. In relation to the actual register of electors, and I think it's a cause of frustration every single election we have when we come across people who have just disappeared off it. People who've lived in the same houses for years on end, who've never moved, and suddenly find themselves removed when they go to vote. They don't check because they assume, since they've always been on the register, why would I need to check? And I know we exhort people to check the register online, but we do need to have a more robust system to ensure that we facilitate people who want to vote, obviously contingent with proper safeguards. And I think a permanent electoral commission in place is the solution to that. We've talked about it for a long time. We need to do it.
Deputy Martin.
Thank you. Taoiseach, while the government likes to talk about being modern and so on, the response to this issue has been so far at snail's pace. I appreciate your comments in relation to Deputy James Lawless, who I think has taken a leading role in relation to this overall issue. But I think the interdepartmental report says almost nothing which couldn't have been put together over a couple of days by any of the many researchers and academics in our universities or who specialise in online communications and security. Taoiseach, it is a simple fact that aggressive campaigns of disinformation are now nearly routine in European elections. What differs between countries is that some have adopted robust measures to identify and to expose this activity. Everyone here has experienced online abuse and disinformation, and equally we all know that one party in particular specialises in aggressive online attacks against opponents. And in terms of public policy, this disinformation is deeply sinister. For example, Russia today has for some reason decided to promote anti-vaccine conspiracies, and these are now being retreated here with no official pushback. The issue, Taoiseach, is whether or not the government is serious about doing something, or if this is simply another process that will go nowhere. Can you tell us what, if any, measures might be in place at the time of next May's local and European elections? And will you, at a minimum, ask internet companies to provide basic transparency by identifying the source and financial scale of political advertising?
Now, who's next? Deputy Eamon Ryan.
Yesterday, Facebook announced that they're changing their rules so that in time of the next local elections in the UK, all political advertisers would have to be registered, all their adverts would be made public in a register that's held for 7 years, the number of people targeted, the amount of money spent, the age, gender and location of those people would all be made public. Can you or will your party commit to similar rules in advance of our local and European elections, or indeed general election, even if we don't get the legislation done in time? But that's the new benchmark in terms of transparency. Will you, in Fine Gael, commit to make fully public the amount of money you're spending on Facebook, or indeed Google or YouTube or other platforms? And will you take into account what Facebook has said yesterday in terms of new rules in the legislation, which I agree with Deputy Martin and others, I think has to be introduced immediately in advance of us having any election?
Sorry about that.
Taoiseach, we've seen how certain interest groups have attempted to manipulate elections both here and internationally, and I think it's very important that we address this matter urgently. I too echo the calls of my colleagues in regards to the needs for this matter to be addressed in advance of the next local and European elections. And I think it's also important that the electorate are given certainty in regards to the source of advertisements that are placed online, most especially their authenticity, given the volume of fake news that's out there. It's interesting, Deputy Martin quite rightly pointed out something that I had actually researched, which was in relation to anti-vax matters that are taking prevalence at the moment online. And although there have been responses, it would be something that I feel this House should in fact debate. But Taoiseach, I would very much appreciate if you would provide us with an update in relation to the public consultation process that's now been engaged following the report of the interdepartmental group. Can we rely upon this process to be completed in advance of the local and European elections? And in fact, to just hone in on one other matter, and that is the advancements that are required with regard to the electoral register, particularly bringing it online, as echoed by my colleague Deputy Burton. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Farrell. Can I suggest to members that we might take 5 minutes from the second group of questions, where only 2 are listed, given that there are 7 in this bunch. Is that okay with everyone? Taoiseach?
Yes, first of all, in relation to Deputy Burton's question on the format of the register, I'll certainly take that up with Minister Phelan and ask him to provide the Deputy with a more detailed response. I think all of us as public reps want to have the register in a format that's usable and that we can use as we go door to door. And I know some people now bring electronic devices with them door to door, but I know everyone isn't doing that. So I think it should be available in PDF format or a format that's accessible to people. In terms of Deputy Howlin's question, I think it's unlikely that we'll have the new primary legislation in place for next year, or before May of next year, but obviously that's not entirely within the control of the government. That'll depend on the government and the houses as well. As regards political parties' online advertising, I had thought that every political party has to give the amount that they spend on online advertising in their annual SIPO returns. If that's not the case, we'd be happy to do so on a voluntary basis. So no difficulty doing that at all. On the Electoral Commission, following a public consultation process, the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Environment, Culture and the Gaeltacht published a report in January 2016 containing a series of recommendations regarding the establishment of an Electoral Commission. This was largely based on the Joint Oireachtas Committee's recommendations. The Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government is currently preparing a regulatory impact analysis regarding the establishment of a statutory Electoral Commission, which examines the cost, benefits and impacts of a number of options. Once the analysis is completed, the intention would be for the Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government to obtain government approval on issues such as functions, membership and accountability mechanisms and timelines for the establishment. This will be followed by a public consultation in the final quarter of this year on the government's proposals, and the outcome of the consultation will inform the drafting of the heads of the bill. There is, as deputies know, a reform of the electoral register underway to allow people to join it online and other things like that. It is our intention to hold a referendum next May to extend the franchise and presidential elections to Irish citizens living outside of the state, and that will require a whole new register to be established for Irish citizens not living in the state, but I'm sure that can be done. In terms of any fundraising carried out by my party, it's done in accordance with the law. We accept no corporate donations of more than €200. In fact, we brought in that law to break the link between business and politics, ensuring that no donations of more than €200 can be provided to any political party. But I know Deputy McDonald raised this question, and I have to say it does concern me that Sinn Féin may be using partition as an advantage in this regard. Because unlike other parties, Sinn Féin is established as a party both in the United Kingdom and also in Ireland. And the rules around corporate donations in Northern Ireland and the United States are very different and much looser than they are here. And I think that creates a whole murkiness around Sinn Féin's finances and the way it engages in political fundraising. And certainly what I would like to know from Sinn Féin is whether it does accept corporate donations of more than €200, which would not be permitted in this state, and if I give way.
Are making a political charge about Sinn Féin and how we operate politically. It is entirely wrong, factually unwrong and incorrect to suggest on the record of the Dáil that there is anything murky or illegal around the financing or fundraising of our party. It is. We are trebly regulated by this jurisdiction, the northern jurisdiction, and any monies raised overseas. We are entirely legally compliant, and I wish that to be clarified on the House of the floor of the Dáil.
I was more than happy to give way, Ceann Comhairle, in the hope that Deputy McDonald might answer my question. And my question was whether Sinn Féin...
Please don't interrupt the Taoiseach.
The defensiveness really would lead you to indicate that there's something to hide here. But the question... The question that I asked was whether Sinn Féin as a political party accepts corporate donations from any corporation more than €200. All of the other parties represented in this House do not. We, in cooperation with the Labour Party, passed a law making sure that no party could receive a corporate donation of more than €200 in order to break the link between business and politics. What I want to know is that does Sinn Féin apply that rule to its fundraising using its UK arm? Or does Sinn Féin accept the spirit of that law and not accept corporate donations of more than €200? Because I do think that would set Sinn Féin apart from the other parties in this House if it was the only party active in this state that continues to accept corporate donations of more than €200. They may do it through their Northern Ireland entity, they may do it through their UK entity, they may do it through some sort of US entity, but there is no other party in this House that does that type of thing. And given that the deputy asked a question about how my party raises funds, I think it's only legitimate that I should ask such a similar question.
Expected to answer, not ask the questions. But
anyway, I should go back to answering Ceann Comhairle.
Yeah.
The public consultation on regulation on online advertising was launched on the 21st of September, and views can be submitted up to the 19th of October. It's planned to hold the Open Policy Forum before the end of November 2018, after the presidential election. The Open Policy Forum is scheduled to take place at the end of November, after the inauguration of the President, to allow sufficient time for analysis of submissions to the public consultation on regulation of online advertising, the closing date for which is the 19th of October. We think it wouldn't be appropriate during a presidential election campaign to host the forum, so that's the reason for that date. In terms of guidelines, the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland has launched guidelines for the coverage of general, presidential, Shannon, local and EU elections in September. These guidelines set out requirements for broadcast companies in terms of their coverage of elections, and apply in addition to the rules of the BAI Code of Fairness, Objectivity and Impartiality in News and Current Affairs. They provide guidance to broadcasters on the manner in which fairness, objectivity and impartiality may be achieved in their coverage, and the guidelines are updated periodically by the BAI in advance of elections or referenda.